On today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to run down the roster and give you the unkindest cut at each position on offense and defense. Plus, what are the top concerns we have as the Giants get ready to start training camp? That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants on SI. Find our written work over at si.com/NFL/Giants. And welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you are watching on YouTube, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and don't forget, click that little notification bell so that you get notified every time we post a new video here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, we're going to give you a list of players at each position that I think are very early bubble candidates. And I'm going to go through offense first, then defense in the next segment. I'm going to tell you who they are. I'm going to tell you why I think they might be bubble candidates based on either the numbers or some other factor. And we'll just, talk through all that stuff. And then in the final segment, I'm going to leave you with my biggest concerns heading into training camp. Giants open training camp this week with the rookies reporting. And next week, of course, the full team reports on the 23rd. First practice is the 24th. And then we go into shows galore, where I'll be giving you updates after each practice. So that's what we got planned for you today. Let's get started. We're going to take a look at the offensive side of the ball. And the first guy that I want to talk about, who I think could be a potential roster cut, is at quarterback, and I'm going to say Tommy DeVito. Now, here's the problem with Tommy DeVito. The Giants have never kept three quarterbacks on the roster, not when, all three are healthy. And I think whether the Giants keep Tommy DeVito on the roster is going to depend on a couple of things. Number one, is Daniel Jones fully healthy? Number two, what happens in the preseason? Now, the issue here is that if DeVito, as I suspect will be the case, if he and Drew Lock handle most of the preseason snaps, then I can't see how the Giants would potentially pass him through to the practice squad, which is where I think they ideally would like to put him. Now, I do think DeVito has earned the right to compete with Drew Lock for QB2. But, you just kind of get the impression that it's Drew Lock's job to lose, that being QB2. So here's the other factor that, could play into DeVito's favor, if you will, if the Giants wanted to keep three quarterbacks. In the past, the injured reserve rule said that if you placed a guy on IR during final cutdown dates, that's it. He was gone for the season. You couldn't designate him for return. This year, they tweaked that rule to where now you can place a guy on IR at the final cutdown dates. And I think you can designate up to two guys for return that you place on IR at the final cutdown date. So I mention that because sometimes with injuries, as they pop up in training camp, you have positions where, the team wants to keep an extra guy because, they're going to move somebody to IR, and that kind of affects the numbers a little bit. So say, for example, knock on wood, let's say, one of the offensive linemen, one of the starting offensive linemen were to get hurt and necessitate a trip to IR, but obviously they don't want to lose the guy for the year unless it's serious, of course. So rather than have to keep an extra offensive lineman, they can put that guy on IR and designate him to return later in the season after I think it's like 4 weeks or something like that. And they don't have to now fudge with numbers and borrow from another position. So I mentioned that because, one of the questions I hope to get in with Joe Shane when he does his camp opening presser is how that new IR rule will potentially affect the decision making process at the numbers, because I think that is going to be a key thing. Now, I say DeVito because, again, I don't think the Giants will keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster. If they do, that to me says one or two things. Either Daniel Jones is not fully 100% and there's some concern, or DeVito just goes and lights it up in the preseason and the Giants don't want to lose him. So that's kind of, where I see that spot going. All right. At running back, I think Deshaun Corbin is going to be on the bubble, and I think he's going to be the unkindest cut at that position. This is a guy who last year, to be honest with you, I thought he was going to make the roster. I thought he played well enough in the preseason, practiced well enough in the preseason to make the roster. He didn't. The Giants thought they were going to get him back on their practice squad. They weren't able to. He went to Carolina. And then when the injuries happened to, Saquon and to Eric Gray and Gary Brightwell, they went and they poached him off of Carolina's practice squad, brought him back. But he really didn't contribute that much because guys started to get healthy. So I think just Sean Corbin, is as good as he is. And I think he could help a team. I really do. I think he's going to be one of the unkindest cuts at his position. Okay, receiver. There's a lot of guys at receiver, but the guy that I think will potentially lose his roster spot is Isaiah Hodgins. And I say that because, last year Hodgins' usage fell off of a cliff. He was kind of like the understudy, if you will, to Darius Slayton. And I think the Giants will keep Slayton. I think their first few receivers will be in no particular order. Malik Neighbors. I think it'll be Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt. That's 4 receivers right there. And oh, by the way, of those 4, I don't think any of those guys really are heavy contributors on special teams. So now you throw in Isaiah Hodgins, who also is not a heavy contributor on special teams. And I just don't see, if you're the Giants, how you justify keeping 5 guys at one position that don't give you snaps on special teams. So Hodgins is the guy I would keep an eye on as a possible, unkindest cut, if you will, at the receiver spot. Tight end, I got to be honest with you, I had trouble with this one. I picked Chris Manhertz, who's primarily a blocking tight end, but I think it's all going to depend on what the Giants want to do. Now, I don't think they're going to run as much 12 personnel as they have in the past, where they've had just 1 running back and 2 tight ends. I think they're going to run a lot more 11 personnel, which is their predominant offensive personnel grouping anyway. But I picked Chris Manhertz because, Bellinger should be a lock. Theo Johnson should be a lock. And it looks like right now Lawrence Cager is going to be a lock. So, and just picking one guy, and obviously, you also have Jack Stoll, you have Tyree Jackson and others, that are vying for time. Manhertz just kind of popped into my mind there because I think he's the most experienced of the group there. On the offensive line, this one was a tough one because I hate to give up on young talent, but I just don't know if there's going to be a spot for this guy. And I'm talking about Marcus McKeithen, who was the 6th-round draft pick a couple of years ago. He had an opportunity last year to play and to start when he replaced Mark Lewinsky at right guard, and it didn't work out very well. And it wasn't totally McKeithen's fault. The coaching was a problem. I will go to my grave believing that to be true. But the Giants have added, guard tackle candidates. They have Joshua Zudu, who they are cross-training at guard and tackle, who I think is going to be the first guy off the bench. Matt Nelson can play tackle. So they have other options. And I just, Marcus McKeithen, the 6th-round draft pick, he was injured his first year. Last year, like I said, benched after a poor showing. I just am not confident that he is going to stick this summer. Now, I make all these predictions with the understanding that obviously the pad's got to go on and we've got to see what these guys can do. But these are just early predictions. All right. So that being said, what about the defensive side of the ball? Who do I have as the unkindest cuts? I'm going to tell you right after this. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you ever find yourself comparing your life to those you see on social media? Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's so easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on their social media channel, but in reality, they probably don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want to be instead of what others have so that you can start living your best life. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Fill out a questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you find your assigned therapist isn't a match, switch at any time for no additional charge. So go on and stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast, we have another edition of Hard Knocks. So after that is done, I will have a pod up for you with the key highlights, my takeaway and interpretation of what we saw, and just a breakdown of the episode in general, which is expected to now move into the free agency period and maybe start to tether on the draft period. So this will be episode number 3 of 5 for the Hard Knocks series, and I will have the breakdown for you as soon as the episode has finished airing. The episode will air at 9:00 on HBO every Tuesday in July. So it is must-see TV if you are a Giant fan or, in my case, a Giants reporter. All right, getting back to our show today, we're going to talk about the defensive side of the ball, the unkindest cuts, guys who are probably the biggest and of the bubble boys, if you will, guys that I don't think, for whatever the reason, are going to make the 53-man roster. So let's look at the defensive side of the ball here now. Okay, I'm giving you one guy at each position or each unit. For defensive line, I'm going with DJ Davidson. All right, I think the Giants, Jordan Riley is the backup for, I think he played well enough to be the backup for Dexter Lawrence. You've got Ryder Anderson and Boogie Basham who are going to get an opportunity to compete for the end spot there. And I just don't think the numbers favor DJ Davidson. I'd be very surprised if there was a spot for him on the 53. Now, I could see him potentially going to the practice squad, but the 53-man roster right now, as it stands with how the numbers are, I think that's an uphill battle for him. Davidson, last year I thought was maybe a little bit better inside as a nose tackle, but Jordan Riley, in my opinion, outplayed him when he was pressed into action when Dexter Lawrence was not available. So I just think DJ Davidson has an uphill battle to stick. All right, linebacker. We'll talk about inside linebacker. I went back and forth on this one between two young players, Darius Beavers and Darius Mawaso. And I've ultimately decided to go with Beavers. And it kind of pained me to do this because before his torn ACL, Beavers was looking really good. And then come last year when he was competing with Micah McFadden for the other inside linebacker spot next to Bobby Okereke, he came up short in his quest to win the job. And then, of course, he went to the practice squad and he sat there all year long, continuing to rehab that knee. Now, a spot for Beavers could maybe be on special teams, but he's got Carter Coughlin at that position. Matthew Adams, who can also play inside linebacker and who was a very good special teamer, is at that position. I mentioned Mawaso, who can play that position and also is a special teamer. So the numbers just don't favor Darius Beavers. I mean, Beavers, if I remember correctly from his rookie campaign, was more of a downhill thumper. Not too much, didn't give you all that much in coverage. And I think the Giants are going to maybe want a little bit more out of their inside linebacker depth. And let's not forget Isaiah Simmons falls in that inside linebacker group as well. Although Simmons is kind of, cross between an inside linebacker and a safety. So I just think it's going to be an uphill battle for Darian Beavers to make this roster. I really do. The numbers just don't favor him. And, it's not his fault he got injured and he lost time. But when a player gets injured and loses time, he falls behind because new guys come in to do the job that maybe you were destined to do. And, the world turns, as they say. So Beavers would be my early pick for being on the roster bubble. All right, let's look at edge. Now, this one, I'm not 100% that he's going to be on the bubble, but I'm going to mention his name anyway. I'm going to go with Tamon Fox. Now, Fox was with the Giants his first year. He was on the 53-man roster for part of the year. Then he went to the practice squad, and we didn't hear from him. The Giants, their edge rushing depth's a little bit better this year. Obviously, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns. If Azeez Ojulari can stay healthy, you're probably saying, well, why don't you have Azeez Ojulari as the guy you're going to cut? Because the guy's got talent, and I don't think they're going to give up on him just yet. So I think they're going to, keep him. And then, you've got guys that can play down on the line. Boogie Basham can stand up and be an outside linebacker. And I think he's going to be a little better fit for this system than he was for Wink Martindale's. Ryder Anderson is more of a defensive, hand in the dirt defensive edge rusher, but he can rush the passer if need be. So again, I'm not so sure there's going to be a spot for Tamon Fox. I think, that one, we've got to see how the bottom of the depth chart plays out, but I'm not convinced that there's going to be a spot for him. Maybe on the practice squad, like you said, but not on the 53. All right, at safety, this one was kind of easy for me. I think Gervarius Owens is in jeopardy of losing his roster spot. Last year, the kid could not get on the field, and when he did get in uniform, he was limited to special teams. So, the Giants have added to safety. They brought in Jalen Mills, the veteran. Obviously, they drafted Tyler Nubin. They've got Dane Belton, Jason Pinnock. And again, don't forget, Isaiah Simmons is going to do some safety work. So I just don't see the numbers favoring Gervarius Owens' chances of sticking on the roster. And I think perhaps he lands on the practice squad as well because, he is a draft pick of this current regime. And maybe they look to move him to the practice squad in hopes of, further developing him because they do have some guys whose contracts end after this season. So maybe if they develop him, they might have something there for the future. Okay. Last but not least, we have cornerback. This one's an easy one, folks. Aaron Robinson. This is a shame because the kid's got good size, good length, good physical skills. He can play ball, but he can't stay healthy. And the old saying, the best ability is availability. This kid hasn't been available. And when a guy misses chunks of time in his first 2 or 3 seasons in the NFL, as Aaron Robinson has, you sit there and you wonder how much of his development has been stunted at this level. And look, I know the Giant cornerback position is maybe shaky to where, they can't afford to be cutting young guys, but I would be really surprised if Aaron Robinson survives the 53, the cut down to 53. I'm just not sure he does, to be honest with you. So he might, but, at this point, history would suggest he's not going to. So, all right, coming up next, ladies and gentlemen, what are my top concerns ahead of training camp? I've got a few. I'll tell you about them. I'll tell you why I'm concerned right after this. Hey, Giant fans, there's so much going on these days in the area with baseball, concerts, shows, the WNBA, and pretty soon the return of football, hockey, and basketball. And if you're worried about getting shut out of your favorite events, worry no more because Game Time has you covered. Game Time offers a large selection of seats at competitive prices, clear seat views, event cancellation protection, last minute money saving opportunities, and easy online ordering. Plus, if you find tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and get the event tickets you want. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Terms apply. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And we are talking about now top concerns ahead of Giants training camp. The Giants rookies report this week. Next week, the rest of the team reports. Next, on the 24th, it is the first day of practice. You'll have the acclimation period, so they won't be in pads. And I will be there. I will bring you daily reports here on the Locked On Giants podcast, as well as over on Giants on SI. Again, you can find the written work at si.com/NFL/Giants. All right. So speaking of training camp, what are my top concerns? Some of them are kind of obvious, but I'm going to tell you why they're on my list and where we're at and, what maybe can be done to alleviate some of these concerns. Number one, we got to start with quarterback. Is Daniel Jones going to be ready? All right. That's probably like one of the top concerns on the list. Is he going to be ready? But more so, is he going to be better than he has been in the past? Now, a big problem with Daniel Jones, I have said it. I know former NFL players have said it. We all can't be wrong, folks, is that Daniel Jones's processing time post snap is not very good. It's not very fast. And he really needs to improve that. All right. Now, it could be that they redesign the offense a little bit to where he gets the ball out quickly. And I think, that's something that we're going to see. We're going to see maybe a lot of passes that are thrown in that short to intermediate range so that Daniel can get it out of his hand quickly, especially to help the offensive line. But there's still going to be some deep shots that they're going to try. And can Jones, if his first read is covered, can he go through his progressions and, make the second and third reads that he would have to? So that's something to keep an eye on. The big thing, of course, being his health and how much does his knee injury or, his recovering knee affect his best asset, which is his athleticism and his ability to run. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. Are they going to scale things back? Are they going to just throw caution to the wind and say, the heck with it? We're just going for it regardless. I want to see what happens. I think maybe they'll go for it regardless because, look, I think back to last year when Jones came back from that neck injury, his second neck injury in 3 years. And what were they doing? They were calling quarterback sneaks where they were sending Jones right up the gut. So I suspect they're going to just play their game the way they want to. But still, I'm curious to see how it plays out. Okay. The other concern, how are they going to protect the young secondary? All right. So you've got Deontay Banks at one corner, who's pretty good. You've got right now penciled in Cordell Flott at the other cornerback. All right. That's not set in stone. That's written in pencil, but Flott has a chance to erase the pencil and put his name in ink at that spot. You have potentially a safety combination of a rookie and Tyler Nubin and Dane Belton, who is, again, in limited snaps has looked good, but can he play a full game if you need him to? And then you have Jason Pinnock back there. Now, one of the things that's going to help that young secondary, actually, there's two things that is going to help them. Less man coverage is going to be called. Shane Bowen doesn't play man coverage as much as Wink Martindale did. That's going to help. All right. Zone is just generally easier for a younger secondary. But here's the other thing that's going to help them. The philosophy shift to where The front seven is going to be responsible for getting the pressure on the quarterback. So whereas Wink Martindale lived and died by the blitz and dialed up all these fancy blitzes from the defensive secondary, therefore leaving guys exposed, or having to go man-on-man coverage, Bowen doesn't really do that as much as Wink did. So that could potentially help the young secondary until they get settled in and they know what they have. So that's something to keep an eye on as well as we get through, the preseason. All right. Another concern, and this one's a big one. Probably should have led off with this one. The offensive line. All right. Now, every year we ask this question: is the offensive line going to be better or different? Every year, the offensive line, the answer to that question is it's different, not necessarily better. This year, I have hope that it'll be better, and I will tell you why I feel that way. Carmen Brasillo. Now, the coaching, I mentioned earlier in the program that I just, the coaching of the offensive line left me scratching my head quite often. There are different ways that Bobby Johnson has taught this offensive line versus how I believe Carmen Brasillo teaches. All right. So the best example I can give you, I'll give you an example from my past, actually, when it came to math. All right. I was never very good in advanced mathematics. So geometry, trigonometry, calculus, pre-calc, all that stuff made my head spin. Now, for the longest time, I thought, my God, I must be stupid that I can't grasp this stuff. And I realized it wasn't that I was stupid. It was how I was being taught. So I remember in high school, I had a teacher come in, and this was for a pre-calculus course. And he came in, and why I was in a pre-calculus course, I have no idea. I mean, what was I thinking? But anyway, the teacher came in, and he started drawing equations on the board. And he's like, drawing these, and he goes, okay, now you guys do it. And I'm sitting there, and he might as well have been speaking another foreign language or something, because I had no idea the why behind what he was doing, the steps, what was the logic. And I would sit there and I'd be like, what are you doing? And I'd have to try and figure it out. Did he divide here? Did he multiply here? What exactly was he doing? And I mentioned this example because when I went to college, I had a teacher who actually took the time to explain the steps on how to solve these same equations. And lo and behold, a miracle happened. I actually got a passing grade in pre-calculus, whereas I flunked it in high school. So the moral of the story, the reason why I tell you this story is because when Bobby Johnson was here and he was teaching the offensive line, he was teaching them maybe their assignments, but not necessarily how to get from point A to point B or point Z in executing the assignments. Whereas Carmen Brasillo's teaching style is a little different. He doesn't just throw something on the board and say, okay, guys, this is what we're going to run. You figure out how to do it. No, Carmen Brasillo will talk about, cues. He'll talk about technique, little tips and tricks that can give the offensive lineman the advantage in executing the assignments. So it's a different teaching style. And that gives me reason to believe, reason to be hopeful that the offensive line this year will be better. Because, I've said this before, I'll say it again. When you see a bunch of young offensive linemen all struggling, it's got to be the coaching. If it's one guy that struggles, you say, okay, maybe it's that guy. He's just not getting it. But when you have a bunch of guys struggling, including, John Michael Schmitz struggled a little bit, these were premium draft choices we were talking about. You got to look at the coaching, folks. You're not going to convince me otherwise on that. So Brasillo's a little bit different as a teacher in that he goes into the whys in the background to set the guys up for success. And then another thing that I think is going to help them is Brasillo, I think, tends to run more gap-based scheme as opposed to a zone scheme. And I think the gap-based scheme is going to help this offensive line because, look, you go back and you look at some of the matchups in the pit or the trenches, whatever you want to call it. And the Giants offensive line just got their hands, their lunch money handed to them, or their lunch money taken away from them. It was bad. So a gap scheme can help them against the bigger, more physical defensive linemen, just the way, it's run. It could also help the running game. So I think we're going to see a lot more gap schemes run by the offensive line, especially in the running game. And I think that should maybe help them. And then, like I said, trickle down to the running game, help the running game find success. So, we'll see how that plays out. If that's indeed, what they plan to run, just another thing to keep an eye on this summer. So that all being said, folks, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. As always, I appreciate you tuning in and spending part of your day with us. Always appreciate it. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. Again, going to have a wrap up on episode number 3 of Hard Knocks offseason with the New York Giants. So until then, everybody, have a great one, and I'll see you then.